thank you guys for coming to Art Workshop 3. If you guys could sign in there. I will let you guys know that I was still working on these slides 30 minutes before this happened, so that is technically the same link as Art Workshop 2. If it says like you filled out the form, just fill out another one. I'll figure that out later. It is just going to be the same spiel as long as you remember to submit it. At one point, you guys can go ahead and do that. Okay, since we are like basically almost done, we're gonna go ahead. Yeah. So just for a basic spiel, I'm gonna go through this every time. Hello. I'm gonna be going through this every time we start the workshop, so you can tune it out if you have heard it like the third time already. But if this is your first time here, so what are art workshops? My art workshops are basically intro-friendly courses to creating art for video games. I do have software tutorials for 2D and 3D art. If you guys want to listen to like the 3D art lectures, they're going to be next semester. This first semester is going to be mainly 2D works. Mostly this is a space for like people who have never touched like digital art to get into, be able to create their own assets without feeling like they have to rely on other people to make their works. And ultimately that is my goal. I just want to make sure everyone has the opportunity to make art, and not only just art, but like quality art. And like I will be here for your research. I will bring you the lessons so you don't have to scour through 5,000 tutorials. And also make sure, like, in the roles in our eGAZ server, we do have an art workshop role. If you take that, you're going to have access to the art workshop like channel itself. I do put these slides down. I also do put VODs in there as well, and I do like talk a little bit more just about the content itself. So just so you guys don't miss everything, if anything, just make sure you get that role checked out. Okay, so starting for the overview, rendering, I technically lied. We're not learning rendering because rendering itself is like the process and the technique. Rendering is like how do you specifically shade a certain object to make it look real. Ultimately, today I want to cover the main topics that will help your rendering look more believable. We have form and structure, anatomy, light, shadow, perspective, color theory, and composition. And we're going to be using this example of this League of Legends splash art. No, I don't play League. I just happen to like the art they produce. Nuh-uh, that's lies from the left. Or my right, technically. But ultimately, rendering, we're going to be learning at the basics, and we're going to be following along with this work of art. Fortiche is actually the animation studio that made Arcane. They don't actually make these illustrations. These are usually going to be freelanced from like Riot Games, the company itself. They'll grab people or they'll outsource it. They did technically outsource Fortiche, but that's like they outsourced the Fortiche, the animation company. They can outsource artists, and this is actually made by this artist called Ina Wang. So we're gonna start with form and structure. Form and structure is just like the complex shape and like any item, any object you see in the world can be broken down to like very primitive shapes. You can see like cubes, you can see circles, you can see cylinders, and ultimately to master form and structure, you are able to combine all of these primitive shapes into one structure and make it look like a real structure, believable, using rendering techniques. You see right here, like I mentioned wireframe. This is like a wireframe. It shows the bounds of a shape using lines and vertices. Very like it is brought from the 3D side of where like you have models, you have vertices within the models, and it's just like important that you should have less vertices and less of that, and less of this. But ultimately, if you look at a wireframe of a 3D model, you can see like the curves in which uh, the topology folds and whatnot. This is, I think, a very important topic, but it's like so hard to like. I can't exactly give an example of this because it's such an abstract kind of topic. So we're gonna be like bringing this into a lot of our other topics today, which I'm going to go into anatomy. So I'm going to give you guys an actual tutorial on like how to draw a human body, but the human body is a lot of shapes, a lot of freaking shapes. So I'm not going to be able to teach you guys like all the muscle groups you can see in your body because there's too many, bro. But ultimately, you need to understand form and structure to be able to replicate anatomy. So, anatomy, like I said, or I didn't really say this, but anatomy is the study of the human structure. We have ourselves a sketch of a uh, skeleton, and the skeleton itself, you can technically see that it's made of a bunch of forms and shapes. You've got like an almost oval kind of like skull, and then you have an oval kind of rib cage, maybe like two that are like slightly curved outwards with each other. Then it's like the reverse of on the pelvic, but it's like squashed, and then you got like the arms and limbs that are like just cylinders and what. Like you can tell that these have like a bunch of forms, but like how the hell do you know that this specific cylinder looks like a bone? Well, that also just comes from like your own experience. But rendering techniques and ultimately context, it's a human skeleton. That's understanding form is more like understanding drawing the specific shapes that we're looking at. It's like it looks more okay. Actually, it will make more sense later. But for anatomy, to break down how to draw a human body on average is 7 to 8 heads tall. And if you see all the lines that I've made, or lines that are located on the skeleton, those are how many heads are on a human body. We have 8 heads down here, and each one of these can be separated by specific landmarks. The first length is going to be the chin, the second is going to be the nipples. Then you go to your elbows on the third head. The fourth head, you'll find the wrist and pelvic joints. The fifth one, you're going to find fingertips. It is technically the same, like it's half your like thigh, surprisingly. Um, then the sixth head is going to go to your knee, then to your the middle of the lower leg, and then it goes down to the feet. Ultimately, to break this down into its very simplistic form, this is probably the one thing you're going to be finding out a lot. We're going to be breaking these down into these limbs are just going to be simplified into lines. The joints are going to be simplified into circles, and then the pelvic and the rib cage are going to be simplified as squares. Ultimately, though, I will like note that there's technically out of my chart here that shows the key features and locations, there's not going to be one that clearly states that this is where the rib cage is going to be. But that's also but the way we found out how on average where the rib cage is going to be located, it's more or less going to be we take the height of the head and we include the chin, and then we multiply that by 3, and that is the length of your upper body. Using these structures, you'll be able to find that the rib cage is this length. Not only that, but the length of the rib cage to the pelvic bone, half of that, half of the 1/3 is going to be the height of your pelvic joint to the top of the pelvis. Ultimately, to study anatomy, the most simple thing you can do is find a reference point, which we chose the head, and you're just going to measure that specific length and compare it to every other structure you can see. If you extrapolate it bigger, then you'll be able to find a little bit more and such for the rib cage and whatnot. Ultimately, now that we have broken it down into the very basic structure, we can add a little bit more to it. Instead of lines, we're going to do cylinders, and we're going to make the joints a little bit more prominent, and ultimately, we're going to have the basic structure of a body. I also like, if you guys already can't notice, the fact that like the spine on the side view of our character, it is curved. It is a very whenever you look at the front viewing, it is a very big misconception that it's just like a front facing cube. In actuality, the spine itself is divided into three separate parts. And if you can see right here, that this is one part of the spine, this is the second part of the spine, and this is the third part of the spine. Each of these spines independently can rotate by its own varying degree. I believe this one has the most variation, or like not variation, but most degree of turns. So which ultimately you can tell by these sections of pivot, like how they are devised. Ultimately, this spine is going to rotate the rib cage. This one is more or less going to direct your pelvis, and this one is going to direct your neck. And because the fact that it is like curved, the spine itself, whatever it's at rest, it is curved. And since the rib cage itself is connected to the spine, it is going to be tilted upward and downward respectively. And then when we look at here, basically what I've been talking about, we're going to be extrapolating these shapes a little bit more. Ultimately, when you trace these, you make yourself a pretty impressive looking human. This looks realistic, if anything. But I want to say that you could technically do more. This is what more or less an actual human body looks like in comparison to the one where we trace down the basic shapes. This, however, I did skip a step. Yeah. So having, learning muscles is the one thing that will take your work of art from looking like this, so looking a lot more like that. But ultimately, it is so freaking hard. There's too many muscles on your body. So I am not going to teach you guys specifically. I'm not going to teach you guys today specifically about like every single muscle in the body. But if you want to learn about anatomy, you're just going to have to break down each limb one by one and study basically how each muscle interacts with others, along with like make sure you get all the rotations down. Like for example, the arm. For the longest time, I've been an art kid all my life. I don't care about science. It blew my mind when I found out like there's a muscle that like folds over your arm every time you turn it. It's like I found that like the weirdest thing and also the most freaking hard thing to understand and draw. It pissed me off. But ultimately, I think maybe if you do want to start with like, or the most important parts of anatomy slash muscles that you want to remember that a lot of artists like forget, we have like the trapezius here are like a normal human is not going to have a very sharp 90-degree angle right here. There is going to be muscles, and it's also like it is like somewhat part of your back muscles as well. So if you have like a huge built back, you're going to have a stronger trapezius, along with the fact that it's like men in general have a much more prominent trapezius. I'll let you guys know that also the collarbone. If you guys want to draw the collarbone starts from the middle here, but it is perpendicular and it's connected to the shoulder. We have ourselves the shoulder muscle itself, but then the chest and the pecs actually like connect inward. Like it is like whenever you pull your arm upward, this muscle like is pulled outward as well. You got yourself the abs and whatnot, whatever. There's the for drawing arms. A lot of people like to simplify it into like specifically chains. They like to imagine chains. This is going to be like a circle. This part is going to be a circular chain, and then this next part is going to be a chain that faces the other way. It's because mainly the two main muscles here are going to just be like you see there's one muscle up here and one muscle back there. Like whatever like muscle gurus are out there, they'll give you like a better talk about it. But ultimately, this is where the chain theory comes from. The top part, and then this side part, and then the bottom one again is going to be, this way. It's gonna face the other way, but this bottom chain also does vary depending on how like your arm is rotated down here. What else? I think like a lot of people miss the fact that like this waist area, like if you want to give your girl a snatched waist, it is gonna be this area. It's mainly gonna be here. It is not where the rib cage ends. It is over here. It is like it's the dip between the pelvic and the rib cage. And also, if you a fat ass does not mean your pelvic is big, okay? It just means that you have more fat over here, okay? Um, big bones is a thing. Don't mistake it, okay? Um, what else? I find like legs are like the one thing I haven't done a lot of studying over. Though whenever I was trying to sketch this out, I did find that there were mainly three muscle groups here that were like the like if you flex them the most, they are the most protruding when it comes to like built people. Um, there is also like a divot here. There's a lot of people do put like a shadow here for like some people with like super built muscles. It's gonna be your knee and whatnot. I think ultimately that should be like most of things that are the most hardest slash people miss when it comes to anatomy. Ultimately, I can't teach every single muscle in the body, but just to let you know, those are the things that people like, the most popular and most commonly missed ones. But ultimately, even if with even with the more built out anatomical correct individual, if you look at the box reference that we have, the ones that are the basic, super basic shapes, it is ultimately basically there. You can still achieve the same like realism effect with the most simplistic shapes. So don't worry about going ham and cheese. You do not need like you do need an anatomy, but you do not need to study it so hard to make at least something look a little bit more real than you think. Okay. Now that we're going on to the head, anatomy, I'm only going to go over the body and the head because I think those are the two most popular points of like reference for people when they want to learn how to draw. And we're going to be following the Loomis method for the anatomy of the head. A lot of like the Loomis head is very popular in the art community. So if you guys have heard it before and you guys have tried studying it before, this is basically what we're going to be doing. If you would like to follow along, number one, you start with a circle. You don't have to make a perfect circle. There is a tool in a lot of drawing softwares that can give you a perfect circle, but a lot of like professional artists like they don't utilize that tool because ultimately right here it is the sketch phase. The amount of time it takes to select a new tool and versus like sure, why not? It's like arbitrary. So go ahead and just go ahead and make a basic circle. Then you're gonna divide the circle into like technically you're supposed to just like clock off like two of the sides, but I found more or less the time it's going to make a perfect square ish. Basically, you're gonna chop off all four sides, and you're gonna make a square inside of your circle. Ultimately, for the head itself, you are going to be erasing these two left and right parts of the circle. So whenever you do divide your head out into another 4/4, it's not going to be an actual circle. Ultimately, in the end, your head is not going to be a perfect circle. For the chin, whenever you divide your circle into two halves, this length is going to be the same length as this, and this is going to be your chin line. And ultimately, these are going to be the landmarks you will find on your Loomis head. The top line is going to be your hairline. The brown line is at the 1/3. The nose line is at the 2/3, and the chin is going to be on the last third. Ultimately, whenever you sketch this out, you can just trace a line from the nose line to the chin. Make sure just make it a little bit more round than you think. Obviously, the chin itself is going to have a lot of variation in its size based on the individual you're looking at. Children have a very puffy face. Old people have a and chiseled people versus like petite people, whatnot. Ultimately, this is going to be the average location where the chin is going to end. Along with the chin line, you have the nose line. This is going to be the nose line is going to be where the at the bottom of where your nose ends. It is not where your nose. It's not going to be where your nostrils are at. It's going to be like the end of the nose. The brow line is going to be on top. Like the eyebrows are going to be on top of the brow line. And hairline is hairline. I also did add the ears because the ears themselves are going to be at the nose line and they're going to end on top of the brow line. The ears are actually much more longer than you think.
I have a question.
What's up?
For the hairline, how do you take into account like male pattern baldness? Like if you have like a 40-year-old man, do you just like put that up a good bit or
You know,
You asked the question that I wanted to ask.
hairline comes in all shapes and sizes. We don't discriminate with hairline. If anything, we're gonna go further if that's the case.
okay, so it never goes low.
It, it's the average, okay? Everything, all of these landmarks are going to be the average on a person's face. It is not going to be the exact. This is also where we get variation in like face size, like face shapes and whatnot. You get new characters by adjusting the nose line a little bit lower, a little bit higher. You can change the brow line a little bit up and down. It's not just about whenever you're making new characters. It's not just about like giving them a whole new eyebrow. Give them some bushy unibrow, and you got yourself a new man. But it is more or less like you can move the brow line up or make the nose bigger, but also like make the nose lower, higher. The chin can also be a little bit more squashed. This is how you get ultimately these bounds can be varied and pushed around to your liking. Okay? To combat with the eye line and the mouth and the bottom lip, once you take your whole character, you divide it in half, and the halfway point of your face is usually going to be where the eye line is located. Once you take, and then like for the mouth and the bottom lip, you still take the 3/4 area, but then you divide this 3/4 area down here into 2/3, like or into thirds, and for the mouth, it's going to begin at the 1/3 mark up here, and the bottom lip is going to be at the half mark of the initial 1/3 we created. Ultimately, this is what it's going to look like. I also am not gonna lie, guys. I did not expect any of you guys to follow along with me. So I know I go fast a lot because I just tend to be I just like talk fast and I find myself wanting to just talk a lot more. So if you guys like need me to slow down, let me know, okay? Yeah. Too far? No worries. Mm-hmm.
How perfect is your hair? Yeah. My hair wants to fade and stuff. Oh, really? How to describe a wall?
This is my phone. On your mother's side. On my phone. Well, then you're screwed.
Male pattern baldness is gonna leave you with it. You can't run away. You have. It's not gonna be great forever.
So we're going to continue on. So ultimately, this is going to be the general mapping of your normal face, but like you can take this head and obviously you can point it to a different direction. How do you approach that? Number one, you take the first step in making that circle, but instead you're gonna give yourself these wireframes to show yourself that this face is gonna be pointing in this direction. Okay, this is just like a normal. This is a normal circle, but instead of like having this middle axis be in the middle, we're gonna tilt it forward to this way. So now that if you imagine an arrow coming from the center axis, it is going to be pointing this way instead of that way. This is like this is a part of where I say like to master form and structure. These are the kind of things you need to deal with. You need to be able to understand how a shape looks in a different perspective, and then using that you can like start extruding things outward, adding things to this structure, and ultimately if to make it look like you added a triangle to a circle, you need to master the understanding and the visualization of what does a triangle look like in this specific scenario. Okay. So for the circle, now that we have the first step done in a 3D environment, we're gonna chop that side off. We're gonna chop that part of the ear off. And if you compare it to the last slide, how you see this entire curve is like here, it's gonna now cut down to a straight line because for its new form, there is no curvature. Ultimately, if you do take away like all these lines and then use like shadows instead, you put a dark side here and then everything else is lighter, you can usually read that that is a sphere with half of it chopped off. Now, ultimately, to understand form and structure, you need to know how specifically where is this sphere going to look and be for it to look realistic. Having these outlines will show you the correct position to shade your object ultimately. And the better the location is, the more realistic it's going to look. Okay. For step 3, we're going to take that same idea again. We're going to cut this into 4 sides. And ultimately this is like, I am following the curvature of a circle, but if we were following the curvature of just a line, technically no curvature, but it would probably like be cut off here, but since I am looking at a circle, I imagine that it's going that the like the paper itself, if I were to wrap a paper onto a curved object, it will foreshorten it. That's yeah, that's why I put the third mark here, though ultimately it is more or less going to be here. This is going to be this is the 1/3 line. This is the 2/3 line, two-third line, and this one is going to be the 3/3 line. Okay.
What lines are they indicating? Those little things there.
Which one? This one?
Yeah, those things.
This one is going to be the 1/3 line. Like if we cut off just like the circle, this is the initial square. This is also going to be the initial square. This is the hairline, yes.
Yeah.
And there's the one on the bottom.
into like this straighter line, because ultimately this we're going to be erasing this part. So it is going to be around like this location up here. Set it a bit lower because the angle itself, it'll be a little bit more like you can understand it a little bit better when we get into perspective. But ultimately, in a vacuum where there is no perspective, this is what it's going to look like. And also, I did shave the corner where, yeah, I took this corner and then gave it the chin, because then you'll find, because the reason I pulled it from there is because that's where the ear is. The ear comes down from the middle of the chopped off area, and then this is also going to be where the jaw, this thing right here is, the jaw thingy. I don't know the name of it. It's technically not the jaw thing, but like the thing above it, the cheekbone maybe. It's like some. I think it's not exactly the cheekbone, but you guys know if you like, you guys know like if you tuck your cheeks in, these are going to be more prominent. That's like the line we're looking at. Yes, if you log, that'll give the results. Yeah, there's going to be like, yeah. Yeah, the ear starts at like the ear over here. It starts at the 1/3 line. Very similarly right here. Now this is a really shitty drawing I made, because this is a drawing I made like 45 minutes before this lecture started. So this is not realistic one bit. This Squidward looking man is like if I worked on this a little bit more, I would have a better example for you guys. But ultimately, this is where like you're gonna like kind of match things up. Handsome Squidward. Okay. Yeah. So you're going to like this 1/3 line. You're gonna find, or this is a real 1/3 line. The 2/3 line you're gonna find at the eyebrows. Underneath it, you're gonna find the eye line, which is gonna be the middle part. I threw the nose somewhere around this 2/3 line, and then I divided that into half, or I divided this into 1/2, and then this is the 1/3 of the last 3-section line. Don't use that as an example. It's a very bad example. Like the actual like the layout is okay. The direction everything is pointing at and the shape is not. That is not what an eye looks like. Yeah. Yeah, because eyeballs themselves, they're like, number one, a ball. But then like most of it is gonna be inside your cranium. The eye shape is like terrible. Just make a line where the eye's supposed to be, and just don't try to copy my drawing.
Why does one eyebrow have half the like width?
Don't ask. By base drawing. Yeah. But also like the fact that we also brought up the idea of the eyeball. The eyeball itself is actually the okay. Obviously you have the eye socket, the eyelids, but I think the average like this is gonna be how big the socket is, and this is like your eyeball is gonna be like this big. It's just like a lot of it is going to be hidden by the eyeball opening blink. What? Eyelid. That one. um. The blinker. Yeah. So the eyeball itself is not going to be this big. It's actually going to be it's going to be much, much bigger. The eyeball itself. The eyeball itself is not an element shape. Obviously, it's going to be a circle, but it's also not the bounds of the circle is not going to be here to here. It's more or less going to be here to like here. It's something I'm not exactly going to cover. I just think it's also an interesting thing that we brought up. This is the eyeball itself is much more bigger than we think. It's just hidden by the eyelid. A lot of it's hidden by the eyelids and how big it'll let you open up. All right. Well, I guess I could just leave it here because the next thing we're going to be talking about is light and shadow. Ultimately, in a 2D environment, like if I take away all the guidelines here for your sideways profiles Metro Man, I guess, um, you're not gonna exactly tell. Like the fact that you you drew this cutoff and that thing is a cutoff. But if you get rid of all of it, a person is not gonna really tell. Like they're probably just gonna think this is a whole just big circle. It's gonna be this whole area is also gonna be round, even though it is clearly cut off. The way we define that with without like directly telling them like, hey, this got cut off is with light and shadow. To our new topic, light and shadow is the illusion of depth using contrast of color. Light and shadow can be influenced by direction, intensity, and material. Overall, this is like a very like everybody has seen a shaded sphere, but the breakdown of a shaded sphere, you're gonna have to highlight the most brightest part of your ball. You're gonna get the half tone, the midway, and then you're gonna get your core shadow. Ultimately, it's just light, middle light, dark. And depending on the light source and where it's facing, you will also have like the intensity. Number one, this highlight here, the strongest part where you highlight depending on the material and the intensity and even the direction. This ball or this highlight itself is going to be much more strong or much more dull. Along with along with the highlight right here, you have if you have a harder light source, like if it's a strong spotlight, you're going to have a very harsh cast shadow, which obviously is the shadow that is being projected because like through the light, because light itself, it will always travel in a straight line. You could technically manipulate how the light travels, but ultimately it does travel in a straight line. If you put a cone or not a cone, like a half no, I don't know. Okay, just if you make like a half cone, a half not a half curved cone, um, and you shine light downwards through it, that's gonna be your normal spotlight. This thing, that thing. Okay, I don't know the name of it. If you have this cone, this curved cone here, and then light shines directly downwards, it's going to go in a straight line. But if you make the opening wider and then have the edge of it protrude outwards, the light itself is going to be shining outwards. It'll look like the light is shining in multiple directions, but the light itself will always travel in a straight line. The little tiny rays that the light is made out of will always travel in a straight line. So but if anything, that does mean like the more wider the cone that you force the light to be in, the more diffused it's going to be. That's why like in a lot of like diffused light sources are going to be in a very like atmospheric, foggy, because a lot of light is being dispersed around the object. It's not a direct, harsh, pure light source. So that's how we're going to get a diffuse shadow. Ultimately, highlight, midtone, dark tone. But you can also see here that there is reflected light. Reflected light, obviously, like all of this light is pouring down, but it's also going to be pouring down here, and light itself is not going to it's not going to absorb any. A surface cannot absorb light. It will always reflect on it, but also depending on the material itself, it can absorb this amount of light or that amount of light, and depending on the reflectivity of said material, there will be a there will either be a strong or a not so strong reflected light. If we imagine this thing to be like some kind of wood, the wood itself, it is like some. If you imagine like a tabletop wood, it is like somewhat shiny. So it does have the tendency of reflecting the light, and ultimately light will bounce off of an object, but it will bounce off in multiple directions, and ultimately some of it ends up back onto your shape. This is where reflected light comes from. And also this is also why there's a difference between core shadow and shadow. I like to refer to this whole thing as shadow, but there is like this very small strip that's like much more darker than the shadow area. But I also find that the core shadow doesn't particularly exist or as strongly if there is no reflected light. Reflected light helps this thing stand out much, much more. What's up?
Like metallic objects have like really strong reflected light and
Mhm.
like really strong like core shadow, right? That's
Um,
why it's like sometimes like almost like you'll see like black on it.
yeah, yeah. But also I think like metallic themselves, they are just like they reflect so much light that ultimately there's just gonna be yeah, this whatever like this reflects because it reflects so much light down here, it's gonna reflect a lot more down here as well. Sure, yes, there is gonna be a lot of lights and blacks, but the more metallic you go, the more mirror property it feels like. Okay. Ultimately, with light and shadow, we're gonna actually bring this guy back in. Um, studying Jason's shirt, I can highlight the fact where I can note the fact that there is a highlight, from here because like you can assume that there is a spotlight coming from top, just all comes from the general location of where the highlights are, and also the fact that there's just you can definitely tell that up here there is some kind of light. It is being like shown not only in color but also like the particles here. There's so much bright light here that even the small particles up here are getting more reflective than the ones that are like around here. But then you also have your half tones and then your shadows. And I did not, and the other model didn't really show it, but I like to talk about the occlusion shadow. The occlusion shadow itself is more or less going to be located deep, deep in here, like the blackest part of the object you're going to find. The occlusion shadow itself, this is like virtually where no light hits. There is, and so therefore it's going to be the darkest place you're going to find, which I see like this is also like I poltergeist it, or yeah, I think that's the word. And then I just like try to block it a little bit outwards. This corner in here, you can see it picked up almost like a virtually darker, like very very dark, virtually black kind of look. And if you look over here in the actual drawing itself, it is going to be more or less represented in these two areas. This will be obviously this is the location where the least amount of light is being hit because it's farther away from the light. It's also in shadow, but the shadow itself has another shadow within it, which is going to be the occlusion shadow. I also found that there's reflective light over here. You will be able to see it much more better over here because if you look at the stand right here, you can obviously infer that it is a metallic gold-like thing, and because of the high like reflectivity that it has here, you can also assume that itself can reflect a lot of light off of it. So this is why you can see a bunch of you can see all this warm orange onto his shirt because the strong light is being reflected off of an object that has high reflectivity. Okay, then I guess that is basically the end of light and shadow. Any other questions before I go on? Okay. All right, now we're going to go into perspective. I just realized okay, yeah. So, like I was talking about, whenever like I was working on this 45 minutes before lecture started, I forgot to put slides in. So this is probably going to be the most driest area. At the end of lecture, if we have time, I will do a proper demonstration of this. Just imagine because I just kind of didn't have time. Anyways, so perspective is the illusion of depth using proportion. Basically, how big you put an object versus how little you put an object inside of a scene. You'll be able to tell one is bigger than the other just because of size, but not only size, but just like the distance. There are two parts to a perspective drawing. There's going to be a horizon line and a vanishing point. Horizon line is going to be where the head level of the viewer is. So if you were to look straight, you're going like obviously you're kind of staring to like nothing. But I think it's easier if you look behind you at the buildings back there, because if you look at the buildings, they all seem to converge to a point that is in the middle of your viewing area. So if you look at the buildings over there, like there are going to be like these lines that guide them all the way to like the middle of your drawing. You would say the vanishing point itself is where like you know that those buildings themselves they are straight lines. They do not like they are not angled in any way, but you see them in an angled way. That's because of the vanishing point, because those lines are going to be converging into a point where they like, converge. Oh, it'll look better whenever there's an actual live example. Horizon line, the horizon line and the vanishing point are on the same axis. The horizon line though is like the longer axis, and then you have a vanishing point right there. Like it's like a timeline or like one of those just line graph things. Your vanishing point is basically going to be your 0, 0 origin, and the x-axis is going to be your horizon line. There are a few different there are different perspectives points. There are 1 point, 2 point, 3 point, isometric. I unfortunately did not put any examples of them. We will get back to them. But I do have an example for J specifically. How do you reverse engineer a space and a specific perspective? So this is going to be the most scuffed part because I really wish I had examples beforehand to show you what like horizon line and vanishing points really mean. So just bear with me. Hopefully I will have a diagram up to show a little bit more context. But this will be a lot better if I show you guys later. So number one, the first thing I would try to do is identify if it's 1 point, 2 point, or 3 point perspective. And since I can't exactly like show you guys what the perspective lines are and the difference between 1 point, 2 point, and 3 point perspective, ultimately I just took the y-axis and I traced back all the organic forms, and I found that they all lead upward top, and up there is going to be a vanishing point. That up there is going to lead to a vanishing point. All of these lines are converging up to a vanishing point up there. Then I'm going to take the x positive axis, and then I'm going to trace all these organic lines, and I'm going to find that all of these converging lines are going to lead to a vanishing point over here. And because I found that there's a vanishing point down here, I have determined that the horizon line is going to be down here. Now, I think like the one thing I want to say about horizon line is that this is where the head level of the viewer is. It is not where your eyes are looking at, it is just the head level. Because if you look straight forward, your horizon line is always going to be like dead straight center. It's probably like if you're facing forward, it would be like right here. But the reason why it's down here is because our head is more or less going to be at his knees. Because our head is at his knees, if we look upward, horizon line doesn't change with our field of vision, so it's always going to be down here. Now, if we were looking at it a top down, if we were looking at him downwards, the horizon line would reach upward because we are looking downwards, but the horizon line is still front of our viewing angle. Now, though, if we were to like squat down lower, then the horizon line actually will change between us. It's just like if you were to bring your head all upward to his head, your new horizon line would be at angle in which you're looking at, it is the angle of or is the location of the head level of you. For the y-axis, I found that the to graph the or not the y-axis, the negative x-axis, quote unquote. C, Z. I mean, yeah, it would probably be better if I said Z. I low key though can't imagine that I'm not a math kid. I'm not gonna lie, guys. I can't really imagine things. Like I can imagine things, but not that way. But yeah, Z axis. I take the Z axis. I find the one thing I used to determine it was going to be Jace's shoulders because I'm going to assume that he is standing like number one parallel to or perpendicular to the table. And so if he's holding a ball up here and he's like presenting his hammer in the back, his that does like if his shoulders are perfectly perpendicular to the x-axis, then they're going to be perfectly aligned on the z-axis. That's why I pulled that out of my ass and decided to act like that was going to be my z-axis. Ultimately, this is what it looks like, completely like outwards extrapolated. This is the vanishing point that these all converge upward to. And this is where the other two vanishing points converge up to. I feel like maybe this might be a little bit better explanation. I will go over this later just because this is a terrible explanation by me. I do need to show you guys 1-point, 2-point, and 3-point perspective examples. But I hope this like gives you a little bit more understanding of what kind of space we are in. Ultimately, this is the horizon line. On the horizon line, you're going to have 1 to 2 to, yeah, there's going to be 1 to 2 point perspectives on it, which, I mean, I was talking about, there's 1-point, 2-point, and 3-point perspective. 1-point perspective is going to be basically this vanishing point. There's only one vanishing point on this axis, but there's no vanishing point up here, so that means everything aligned on the y-axis is going to be the parallel, like perfectly parallel to the side of the campus. For a 2-point perspective, it is going to be, there are going to be 2 points here, but there is not going to be a third one. So the face of everything is going to be parallel to the viewing eye, but the shape itself could be skewed left or right based on that. And then 3rd-point perspective, there's going to be a 3rd point up here, which is why it feels, this is just basically 3rd-point perspective. There is now a point up there in which will show like a little bit, like you can, more perspective. There is technically 4-point, 5-point perspective, but if you ever have seen a fish islands, imagine drawing that and ask yourself, do you really want to commit to learning that? No. I will answer that for you. No, you don't. There is isometric. I will show you an example of that later, but basically in a vacuum where there is no perspective, this is like if you draw a normal cube and like the cube itself has equal lengths on both sides, and the like the back ends of these cubes are all equidistant from each other. Everything is equidistant to each other, and if you were to move an object anywhere, everywhere, it would still exist on a one-plane stage. Okay, then obviously, this is also a scuffed part. I couldn't do my pretty animations here because I ran out of time. So this is, if I were to try to put anatomy into this perspective, I more or less would, number one, if I were to do the body, I would take this vanishing point, and if I know I'm going to have this face here, I'm going to take this line, or I'm going to take this point first actually, and I'm going to put a ruler basically, and I'm going to trace it all the way down to the vanishing point here. I'm going to take this vanishing point, I'm going to take this point, and then take it to the vanishing point. And these lines are going to converge to that vanishing point right here. Then I'm going to take this, I'm going to take this side, I'm going to take this line, put it to the vanishing point over here, and those are going to converge to this vanishing point. Then these 3 lines are going to converge upward all the way over there, and then these last 2 are going to be derived from the third and these 2 floor vanishing points. ultimately, using using said steps, you will be able to put any space, any box in a certain space and make them all look like they make sense next to each other. I will go over this later. All right. Skipping over that, color theory. Color theory is so fun. So color theory itself, I wanted to number one preface that color theory is a theory. We cannot prove, there's no scientific equation that can prove that, oh, we like this, we like these colors next to each other because there's X amount of uh, endorphins that get released whenever we see whatever the fuck. No, no, it's all vibe based. Color theory is a big vibe based theory on we think colors look good like this because of these specific reasons. Like you can, in the end, you can tell the fact like I like these colors next to each other more than those. I can't really tell you why. It's just a feeling. I just want to make sure you preface this. This is because I want you to preface that this is a theory because color theory is not going to be your end all solution to choosing like, hey, I'm going to choose this color and I think I'm going to pair it with this color and that color because color theory told me to. No, it's more or less I'm going to take this color and I think these two other colors are going to pair well with it because using color theory and using past experiences and all what goes in, it will probably lead me to the best result. So, and for our color theory lessons, we're going to divide this into like 2 and 3. These are just going to be like the whole definition of color itself, and this is the actual like theory. It's like the color theory in action. Technically, all of these are color theory, but I'm just going to say like this is more technical based, more like understanding what color is, and this is like how do we apply that into other ways. For color theory, each color can be defined through hue, saturation, and lightness. Hue itself is going to be the actual color, the saturation is how close it is to said color, and lightness is how close it is to gray. I like this color system. I think it's really cool. It takes a lot of visualization to understand this color system, but basically we can also take this and then we can simplify it into this kind of. You see this more often in drawing software. So since you're going to be working more in this drawing software, this is going to be a little bit better of a reference for you in the future. This is going to be your hue. This is also your hue. If an apple is red, your hue is going to be red. It's going to be hue. If anything else, like for this example, if you're going to choose purple or blue purple, your hue is going to be this blue purple here. That is your hue. Within the hue, you have saturation. Saturation is this outer cone. You take this saturation and you're going to pull it more saturated, or you're going to pull it more desaturated. Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry to lose myself. Hold on. Yeah, yeah. So saturation itself, if you see down in this graph, it is more or less like. Okay, now I am losing myself. Okay, no. So saturation is actually going to be this one. You're going to take this entire sphere and you're going to move it upwards or downwards on this hue or on this scale because the saturation itself, this is the most saturated point of your color, and this is the most desaturated point of your color. And you're going to basically, the more you go down here, the more desaturated it becomes. Now, lightness is basically how tall or how less, like, it is going to be this axis. Basically, you're going to take this, and then you're going to determine how close it is to gray. So, oh Lord, save me. Okay. Okay. Yeah. I fucking hate color. Let me reset myself and let me think about this clearly before I start talking out of my ass. Okay, so definitely, so this is this is strongly of the this is saturation because the closer of it. Oh, fucking kill me already. Okay, sorry guys.
You got it.
I'm gonna kill myself. Okay. I don't play League. Okay. Okay.
The saturation is just like left to right, and there brightness
Yeah.
is this, and then hue just pick whatever,
Mhm.
and then this is like
Yeah. Ultimately, this is 100% hue. I believe it is the more gray a hue becomes, the less saturated it is, and depending on the location of said of like the desaturativeness over here will determine how light it is. And I think that,
so
I'm
I
pretty
guess
sure
this
that's
could be like slide it up or down.
yeah. This
Slider.
yeah this slider is going to be the lightness.
That's value.
And then if it closer to the center, you're more desaturated. Farther away you are, you're
Yeah.
oversaturated. Something like that.
Yeah. I will say, like hue, saturation, lightness itself, there are a lot of different words to define what it is. For hue, people call it chroma as well. Um, but ultimately, like chroma, like hue, because sometimes is referred to chroma. But I also will note that chroma is actually more about like this scale and like how gray. Like this one has high chroma and this one has low chroma. Okay. So okay, let's see. So hue itself is going to be this range, and it is going to be this slider right here. Saturation. This is basically how close it is to the hue. This is the highest saturation you're going to find in the hue, and the more you bring yourself away from it, the more muted it's going to become. Lightness is going to be this scale, basically how close it to gray. So you can have high lightness or lower lightness, which is basically darkness. Ultimately, like when I say it's how close to gray, this whole scale, no, I was maybe I've used the word lightness all my life, but I think the better word to say it is going to be value because you can have higher value up here and lower value down here. I'm pretty sure that's how it works. Yeah. So ultimately, saturation. These three, saturation, value, and hue itself, they're all going to be able to determine a color. And this is the basic equivalent of like teaching somebody how do you mix any color using only red, blue, and green, or red, blue, and yellow. So because ultimately, if you imagine yourself like if you imagine an apple, you're gonna be like, okay, that is a red apple, so I'm gonna put myself right here. But it's also like this apple isn't like truly red. It's like a little bit lighter. So you're gonna take this like hue slider and you're gonna bring it a little bit like you're gonna keep it in the upper sector of your hue box, and then you're gonna be like, okay, now that it's here, it just looks like pink now. So I'm gonna probably bring it a little bit up more orange, and you're gonna be like, okay, maybe that's closer, and then it's ultimately like no, ultimately to perfectly color pick a color, it is just gonna be like I think it's a little bit more warmer. I'm gonna put a like, it's gonna be somewhere in here, and in comparison, and like ultimately that I'm gonna move on just because I'm gonna crash out the more I talk about this. So, primary colors. Growing up, you know that primary colors are going to be red, yellow, and blue. What defines a primary color? You're usually told that it's because you cannot mix red out of any other color in the colors. Like red pigment is the purest form of color, and you cannot derive it from orange or purple or anything else. Same thing goes for yellow and blue, and ultimately the red, yellow, and blue color wheel was born. For the longest time, a lot of people like for ages and centuries, it always has been red, yellow, and blue as the primary colors. But as the new ages come, we have more technology and more science. And ultimately, we then realize that red, yellow, yellow, and blue are not the primary colors because you cannot derive cyan out of red and blue. Cyan and magenta cannot be derived from red or blue, but red can be derived from magenta and yellow. Cyan and magenta can create blue, which is ultimately why we found out that cyan, magenta, and yellow are the actual primary colors. For red, yellow, and blue, though, I will say though, like I think okay, now I'm gonna come back to that. Ultimately, that's why we found out that cyan, magenta, and yellow are the actual primary colors. But then new technology happens, and then we bring up this new idea like screens. When it comes to light, turns out you can make yellow. You can make yellow out of red and green, specifically using light. If you shine red light and green light on top of it, it somehow makes yellow. So ultimately, if we can create yellow, that means yellow isn't part of the primary colors. And that's why we replaced it with green. Now this is really freaking confusing for obvious reasons. But ultimately, um, I'm gonna first go through see the difference from each other where it derives from, and then we'll come to a conclusion of primary colors and whatnot. So red, yellow, and blue is the colors that are mainly derived from pigments. Adding colors together will make black. For pigments, when it comes to pigments, if you paint red on a surface, light then shines onto the red. It will absorb every other light ray, like every other color other than red, which then red will get reflected back into your eyes. Now, if you were to take yellow and mix it with red, the light that shines into the pigment will reflect both of their properties. So ultimately, you get orange because it is reflecting both red and yellow light. Now, if you mix blue into that, you get reflected back red, yellow, and blue lights, and in theory, it makes this brownish, almost black kind of color. That's why we call it subtractive, because the more colors you put into something, the less light you will see, the less color you'll see, basically. For CMY, this is more like for ink. In printers, you're going to have a cyan color, a magenta color, and a yellow color. Whenever you put when you put a printer, if you put a paper into a printer, they're first gonna plop down cyan, and then they're gonna overlay yellow, and then they're gonna overlay magenta. Ultimately, whenever you overlay multiple of these colors downwards, it's gonna bring you back to this muddy black, almost like brown, almost black color, and that is why we also call it subtractive, because the more colors you put onto it, the darker it gets. Because and ultimately, subtractive and these subtractive colors, they're going to be what is it? The more so if you can see like yellow and cyan, green is actually more darker than cyan and yellow. Red is darker than magenta and yellow. Sure, you can't see it now, but if you put this in a black and white filter, this is going to be a darker chroma, a darker yeah, like it's a darker chroma. Like back here, where I talked about this has a lighter chroma. The hue itself, this green hue, is lighter than red, and black is where this darker blue is actually darker than red. Each color itself has its own brightness, and this ultimately is darker than these two. The more colors you put into each other, the darker it gets. Now for the RGB, this is going to be mainly light. Whenever you look at a screen, it is going to be like a billion, like too many tiny little light bulbs that are put next to each other. And whenever you pull back and see all these light bulbs together in a small little mesh, just basically your laptop, your screens, your monitors, it is going to spit you out a quote unquote color. But it's actually all red, green, and blue light. There is technically, you cannot technically make a yellow light. In the end, it is a combination of red and green light. And whenever you put more light onto each other, it's going to get brighter because because obviously you're just spinning more light into something, which just makes it more wider. This is a very scuffed explanation of these three. I swear I don't script these things. I should probably do that more now that I'm like starting to lose my mind. But ultimately, whenever you're working with these primary colors, what is a primary color? It is technically something that it is a color that you cannot mix out of other colors in its respective color wheel. So when you're working with pigments, RYB is going to be your primary colors. When you're working with prints, you're going to do CMY, and then when you're working with light, you're going to go with RGB. Now, for digital artists, which one are you going to be using more? It's probably going to be RGB because you are painting on a screen that emits light. And I think the most interesting thing about these primary colors is that if you utilize RGB, you're going to get you're going to be able to convey the most amount of colors in the visible light spectrum. In comparison to CMY and Pantone, which is another word for the red, yellow, blue mixture, this is going to be the seeable, like you cannot convey this color in a RGB, RYB spectrum. So ultimately, color schemes. So the fact that like for all of our color schemes, we have always used the RYB spectrum because we've like grown with it. But does that mean it's incorrect knowing that it's not the true primary color? Because technically the true primary color is RGB. No, not really, because I think for the primary colors it is very subjective when it comes to the medium you're working with. I think if you are painting, make sure you stick with that spectrum. If you are doing prints, make sure you stick with that spectrum. And if you're working with light, you just got to stick with this spectrum, because ultimately they are true in its own respective sphere. You cannot mix red if you only use pigments. You cannot make cyan if you're only working with ink. You cannot make green if you're only working with light. And so that's why I don't think it's inherently wrong that we're still using the RYB scale for a lot of our color schemes. It's because like ultimately art from traditional to digital, it is still practically the same concept. We just have a lot more different tools. We can still see the same, almost all the same light within it. So I think this is still valid. But I do have seen like there are many more color schemes that like in color wheels that include RGB, and they use like that to instead like they replace all of this stuff into an RYB scale or an RGB scale. So ultimately, I just want to say that this is still valid even if the primary colors aren't. For color schemes, we have monochromatics, analogous, complementary, split complementary, triadic, teradic, and square. Basically, color schemes are like what specific colors look good together, and we ultimately came up with these ideas by looking at geometry and throwing them on a color wheel, I guess. It still works somehow. So monochromatic is going to be color schemes that only utilize one color. But I will also say that monochromatic doesn't mean it just has to be that color. You can mix black into it, and you can also mix white into it. Mixing black and white and the original hue that you chose, it is fully monochromatic. But now if you mix that with orange, then it doesn't become monochromatic. Analogous are usually the colors that are going to be next to the hue of your choice. Complementary is going to be across the wheel, purple and yellow, red and green, that kind of works. Split complementary is a tiny triangle. You just squash a triangle, and then it's like you almost have a triangle. Fucking hell, I'm crashing out already. I've been talking a lot today, so I'm gonna like split complementary is these. I'm gonna lose it, guys. Yeah. Ultimately, you take the opposite complementary and then you split it in half. You take the like minds of the other two, and you get the the trio. Triadict is just going to be the three equidistant colors away from each other on the wheel. The teradict is going to be the tetradict. Take that one. Okay. It's going to be not the equal distance. It's not going to be the four equidistance away from each other. Just a little bit squashed, but I would just say it's like analogous, but the complementary analogous. And then square is just going to be the four equidistant colors away from each other. Mm-hmm.
I think I saw like a color wheel in the co-op. They have
Mm-hmm.
like a color wheel tool that you can use to like spin it. I think I bought one.
Oh, that's
It's like
cool.
pretty nice. Yeah, like they have like a color wheel and like you can spin it like you can spin it around. Like if there's a color you want to pick as your primary, go for that, and then it will show you there's this analogous complementary stuff to it.
Mm-hmm.
I think the co-op has a color wheel, and I bought one. I don't know if they still offer it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I don't know if they still offer it. I remember buying one from co-op. It's very cool.
Okay, so going down for color schemes, if we go back to this work of art, we can number one pull the fact that there is this very bright blue from the ball itself, and I think it's very cool that they do that because like the fact that they chose this specific blue, this is the only blue other than the hammer that originates with blue. So usually your eyes will be drawn to like only looking at the blue and also make an association with the fact that these two are probably made of the same material and are correlated in a certain way. I will I believe though that I believe that in the lore itself, them two are like condensed magic and whatnot, which is interesting. So it just gives you the association that this is made of that. And outside of the blue, though, it is going to be a complementary. It's going to be a complementary from the yellow and the purple. They are technically complementary from each other. But using that blue, I would probably consider this more of a split complementary color scheme than anything. Now for color context, this is how the perception of color is affected by its surroundings. If you can tell here that using this mid-tone, you'll be able to see that there's a difference in these two tones in comparison if you just look at the white and the dark tones. That's because the context around it influences the way we perceive it. Just like on the other one, you find that the yellow box in the left is a more saturated tone versus the one on the other side, which is a more desaturated tone, despite them both being yellow. Now, how do you use this in art context? I would say that back there, you can tell that that is a gold that little corner thing up there, that is like gold curtain, like some kind of gold item to it. Despite it not being like the gold we see in the front, you can still tell that it is gold because in comparison to the things around it, it is a more yellow tint compared to whenever we take that surrounding area and put it next to a yellow. We use color context to basically tell the viewer, I know that this isn't gold, but this is gold. Color symbolism, subjective meanings that are attached to colors. You know, you have the red, yellow, orange, yellow. Red is danger, yellow is more danger, green is poison, and whatnot. I feel like this is a topic that a lot of people like know and understand. They're like, yes, this is how it works, whatnot. So I'm just gonna brush over it a little bit. There's also the warm and cool tones that everybody knows about. There's red, orange, yellow that are warm. It makes the atmosphere feel a little more warm in comparison if you use green, blue, and purple, which is going to make things more cool. Ultimately, for color symbolism on this work of art, we have purple and yellow, which I find references to the prestige, in which, like, not only gold, the fact that it's rich. Purple is associated with royalty because back then purple was extremely hard to get as a pigment, so only royalty could afford it. Therefore, that's why the symbolism of purple and yellow are gonna equal to my choice of prestige. And blue, I associate with electricity and technology, which so which I find fits well with the fact that this is what you call condensed magic and a progressive kind of invention. Lastly, we're going to go into composition. Composition is going to be arrangement of different elements to make a harmonic product. In a long, whenever you work with Riot Games, usually you have to give them 4 different compositions, and then they're going to choose their favorite one, and then they're going to let you proceed with drawing it. Ultimately, there are a lot of different compositions Ina chose to continue on with this product. Most common ones, though, you've probably heard of like rule of thirds and then the golden ratio. Um, I'll come back to the slide, but for the composition of the current Jace piece, you can if you put a the rule of thirds on top of it, I think it does work fairly well. I think each quarter each quarter has its own like ideal thing to look at. But for the rule of thirds, it actually states that the most ideal like thing to look at is going to be at these corners on these lines. And so it doesn't exactly fit as well as you may expect. Maybe the fact that this stand is located on this bottom corner works out, but I think it works better with the more harmonic triangles. These harmonic triangles, these lines will guide the viewer's attention. Usually they lead from the left to the right. They're going to first look at the hammer, then they're going to look at the hand, and then they're going to use Jace's stance to draw their view upwards to the golden ball. Ultimately, I find that the golden ball is the one thing that this composition is like. They want you to look at the gold at this blue ball. That is like the whole point of the composition. And I think the most interesting one I found out of it is that this does have the golden ratio in it. Whenever you pull, your eyes are going to pull downward, and then they're going to lead backwards into his arm. And into his arm, you're going to find yourself that golden that you're going to find the golden ratio along with the blue ball that he's holding. Going back to the thumbnails that Ina did, I would say, like we already did, golden ratio, golden triangles. I would probably say this one is also a golden triangle. It's just the opposite way. We have this main triangle here, and it's going to be down, or I think it's going to be, yeah, it's going to be down, up, down. I think it's also the same. I think a harmonic triangle is going to go both ways. I think this one is going to be more equal to the rule of thirds because if you split them in thirds, Jake's is going to be on the 2/3 of the section of where we ideally want to look at it, and I think this one is more or less equal to the golden ratio. You're going to find yourself leading to the subject with his face along with his ball. Okay, so for the process, okay, so now that we've like went through all these theories, now I'm gonna actually go over how a lot of artists go ahead and set up with their drawings. For whenever they start, they usually do with like a rough sketch. I also like took a bunch of screenshots from a YouTube video, so low key. Like this also like was really a really crunchy YouTube video. It was like 780, 720. I was like, why the hell is it like? Okay, yeah. So number one, they start with a rough sketch, and they don't exactly do it. They skip over the red line, but then after they do the rough sketch, they're gonna do a refined sketch slash outline. Yeah, basically, the red line is something I like to do. It is like you start doing a sketch, and you ask yourself, why the hell does it look so wonky? You go over with the red line, and then you start like checking your anatomy, start drawing out boxes. You start drawing out the boxes of like of where you think the head should be, and then along with the perspective lines and the perspective grids, making sure that they all look like that they exist in one area. And ultimately, it is basically checking your work on an essay. You're going the revision and the edits, but you're mainly there to check the perspective and the anatomy of your individual. And I also find that whenever I was trying to like find YouTube videos that showed all these processes, they're just so good. They don't need the red line for some reason, which pissed me off. So I couldn't exactly find an example of like why of like red lines. Red line is important, guys. Just make sure you check your work before you go down to the refined sketch and then the outline ultimately. Now I will say that depending on the kind of art style that you are going for, there is a lot of deviation with what you choose to do. Some people don't do outlines at all for very painterly styles like Riot, for the Jace work of art, yeah, for the Jace work of art, I don't think that they had any outlines, any sharp outlines. And for stylized media, there are going to be a lot of outlines. This has high deviation. Ultimately, whenever you're drawing, there is no right or wrong way to approach how you're drawing. Ultimately, is this the desired result you want? Yes or no? If that is, if you want a certain way, you're probably going to choose these kind of tactics. So for rendering, first of all, you're going to block out your shapes. When quote unquote blocking out your shapes include like basically taking your entire subject and coloring them in, and then usually on a clip-on layer, they didn't clip it on; they literally painted it right on top. But I would usually put a clip-on layer. I would put an extra layer, put a clipping layer on top of it, which basically meant if I draw out of the lines, it will not show on the shape that I selected underneath it. Also, for the shadow layer, you can either do a subtractive or additive work, or subtractive or additive process. Oh yeah. Well, for subtractive and additive this time, this is going to be a separate. This I'm using this as a separate definition. For subtractive, you're going to paint your entire subject in like your your dark shadow, and then you're going to erase where you find that the shadow ends. Or you could just go ahead and draw where you think the shadows are. That's just the additive. Subtractive, you erase away, and additive, you just draw on. Same thing for the highlight layer. Blackout shapes, just basically like the skin layer that they did. Um, that is the blocked out shape of said layer. I don't. Obviously, that's post processing, but this is also another blocked out color layer. Mm-hmm. For post processing, once you like render everything with shadows and highlights, you're probably gonna add a lot of post processing effects on top of it. You're gonna have a lot of blending modes. Uh, you're gonna probably put like a bunch of glow on top of it. Some people put like filters, they color correct it, and they also sometimes put chromatic aberration on it. Um, Adding screen, so this is not the software that I don't know which software you're using, but if you look very closely, it says like layer 3 normal 100%. Layer 3 just shows you which layer you're talking about. 100% is the opacity, but normal is the kind of blending layer you're looking at. If you look at set 1, this folder right here, it is set to multiply. Multiply is a blending layer, or it is a blending mode. Basically, it takes the color that you're applying onto a subject, does a lot of math to it, and then makes it different looking. Like I genuinely cannot explain. Like I could explain multiply, screen, all the different layers, but there's a lot, and just fuck around and find out, guys. Yeah, yeah, I'm not. Yeah. Mhm. Yep. Ultimately, these are the more common processes when it comes to approaching a illustration for digital works. Um, and that is basically it. I'm done. I'm finally done. That that took a lot of energy out of me. Okay, we have basic. We still technically have about like 20 minutes. So, but ultimately, this is the end of the main content of my lecture. For the last 20, I will go back to purport like to perspective and like actually explain it a little bit better. But ultimately, if you guys would like to leave, this is like my go-to. Like, hey, we're basically done. You do not need to be here if you don't want to, kind of thing. But ultimately, since it is the end of my lecture, for next time for EGADS, these are all of the events that we're going to be doing. We have Dev Nights, 5 to 7 in the GDC. We're going to be working on a horror game with other individuals that are in the org. We have a speaker night with Sean Willman. I believe this topic is about sound in video games along with his like voice acting. We'll probably send more information about that soon. Until then, we have another Unity workshop with Giancarlo. And then we're gonna have another Dev Night. Dev Nights is a repeat, as every Wednesday repeat. We're gonna be alternating in person and online. It's not. It's not order. Boo. Cringe. Okay, my bad, guys. Okay. And that we are collabing with the Halloween social for long. Oh yeah, this one. Yeah, that was my bad. We're collabing on a Halloween social with Longhorn Gaming. We're gonna have more information soon, but if you'd like to volunteer, we're going to have this opportunity where you can show off your horror game. Anything you guys have built, like we will have a table set up for you guys to be able to show off your game, horror related. So just like Halloween. We have a new Game Sprout theme coming November 1st. If you guys don't know, Game Sprouts is a EGAS hosted event where we basically we give you guys a theme and you have basically a whole month to create a new piece, which is either a work of art, a music track, or even a gameplay mechanic, something very small for you guys to work on. And it is also, we do have participation points when it comes to it. The person that has the most amount of participation will get like a cash prize. I think like 100 or something. So, and it is also like 100% participation based. So don't feel like you have to pump out the best thing. It's literally supposed to help you pump out more and more content for self improvement. Ultimately, the next workshop I'm going to be doing is we're going to be doing animation. I'm going to teach you guys how to animate things. Yeah. Ultimately, that is it. I apologize for the crash out. If you guys are staying behind, I will be setting up the stream, a screen share of my stream. But ultimately, this is it. Okay. So, yeah.
I mean, wait, is it on? Oh.
I don't know how to do it.
Is it like good here, like good your screen?
Yeah. I just want to do that. This thing.
Yeah, is it? It should be there. I don't know. Yeah, just reach how much like the process.
That's just like me.
Is it?
Have you taken like an art class? High school art.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's okay for my high school art thing. It's gonna give.
There.
I never took it.
Can you dance? Show us that up right now.
I could never.
How do we get that?
How do we get that up there?
I'll tingle it.
Do we want to drag everything over again?
Oh.
Yeah, we're gonna go back to perspective because that was like the most scuffed part of my lecture. To make sure you guys understand.
Oh yeah. There's something here.
Oh yeah, that I think during the Renaissance it was a lot of 1 point perspective works. Like the Last Supper was a 1 point perspective work. Yeah.
I'm curious. What happens if I do this?
Yeah, I'll sit. Oh, you just pulled it out like this.
We are doing.
We're gonna try to
Wonder how they deal with like
we're gonna try to do some bullshit. But
other. Does this work? I wonder when they did like the 2 or 3 points stuff. I only know. That does not work. I only know like perspective.
all right, we're gonna have to do the scuffed version now.
We will do that then. Okay.
All right.
So that's homework, I guess, for you.
God, I'm gonna.
Okay. Hang on.
Okay.
This is where we just move.
All right, y'all. You're gonna see the best stream you can. Yes.
OBS user.
Yeah. This is what we have to work with because we still can't figure out how to iPad screen share anything.
Boo! I hate iPad screen share.
Boo, me too.
iPad screen share killed my grandma.
Oh, I see. Anyways.
Does this go down? I do not go down. Okay. Well, you get that.
All right. Thank
Thanks on,
you.
everybody.
I'm not. Okay.
My laptop's over there, so I don't need to follow along.
Where is it? Okay. Alright, so okay, I'm gonna go through examples for 1 point, 2 point, and 3 point perspective. So, so number one, you're going to first draw your horizon line, and like I said, this is the head view of your person. It is not the direction it is points. The head is pointing at that will influence the location that the horizon line is located. Uh, it will influence where it looks like it exists, but it still exists on the same plane. So that's going to be our horizon line. And for 1 point perspective, we're going to have one vanishing point in the middle. For the 1 point perspective, if we want to put a cube in this world, I'm going to go ahead and draw a square. But then when I take the square, I'm going to then take all of the edges and I'm going to point them backwards to the cube. And I guess this is a pretty bad example, considering that I didn't exactly account for. But now that these 2 points are connected back to the vanishing point, I'm just going to draw a line back there. And if I ultimately erase these, we have a cube that exists in this world. Now if I want to make a different cube, maybe I want to put it up here, it's above my horizon line, and it is in a different shape. I'm going to go ahead and draw one up there. Then I'm going to rotate my ruler and have it point backwards to the vanishing point. I'm going to take the second point and then the third point. All right, and then take off the ruler. And then I'm gonna cut them off depending on how big I want that square to be, but technically that rectangle / rectangular prism. Now it just looks like we have 2 points that exist in a world. But I just want to this is basically like how are you going to make these planes look like. The whole thing of proper perspective is that how do you take these two shapes and make them look like they exist in the same world? That's gonna be a 1 point perspective. Now, I'll show you guys that if I were to have my horizon line down here, I mean, obviously you could still extrapolate from the previous example of what it looked like, but this is basically like if I was looking up at an object. I'm gonna go ahead and do a shape. If I were going to take each point and bring it backwards to the perspective, anyways, yep, and then I'm going to cut them off how I see fit. These lines are going to be parallel to each other because in the 1 point perspective, the only thing that we care about is one vanishing point. You're basically now looking up at a cube. Okay. Now, for 2 point perspectives, we're going to have a horizon line, and then we're going to have 2 vanishing points. I should probably transition. Okay, I'm gonna put it in the middle. I'm gonna have 2 vanishing points. Now, if I were to have a cube up here, now how do we work with 2 vanishing points? We take this bottom axis and we bring it to this point, and then we take the other axis and aim to that point. And if I am not tripping, I since I did not plan this, I low-key think I did this. No, I think I did it right. I think I did it right, yeah. Yeah, no, this is perfect. This is going to be this is now a shape that exists in a 2-point perspective. Now, obviously, this kind of like doesn't work that well because because ultimately these are probably going to have to connect this way. Yeah, this that way. Okay, I think I'll probably have to do a better example. I think it'd be better if we started with this side axis, and instead of doing like an actual cube, we're gonna bring one side here, the other side supposedly here. And then we're going to take the third axis and the fourth. Okay. And then whenever you take, once you take these two, I'm going to probably mark off that I want my cube to be this wide. And then I'm going to take, and okay, I'm just going to forget about the ruler. I'm going to pull a line from here, pull a line from there, and now ultimately this cube and that cube should look like they exist in the same plane. I think this cube's kind of sucks, but this is basically what I am trying to accomplish. And ultimately, like, if I were to be like, okay, I'm gonna make this actually like way taller, and I'm going to pull these lines outwards, and if anything, this is a street, bro. This is a street, and I'm just gonna say that this is a building, and this building in existence is going to have these walls that are going to pull backwards into said vanishing point. Uh, it's gonna look scuffed like this, sure, but ultimately these are, yeah, this is basically a window, and if I were to choose to make that a window, this is how you make a window in a yeah. This is how you put a window into an existence of a 2-point perspective grid. Now I could probably put like a door here, and you could technically see what I'm trying to go for. It doesn't look that great because this is like a high. I kind of chose a very unrealistic point of ground. But ultimately, if you have a house in a weird, wonky perspective, you're not. I think it would look way more stupid if you had a normal box like this, and then a normal looking door like this, because then it doesn't look like it makes sense, and it doesn't look like they exist in the same area. Ultimately, this is probably going to make a lot more sense. And I think it's actually going to be like this. And I think that wall that this perspective is extremely foreshortened, which I low key should have not done. This looks like a very stupid house. But ultimately, this is the theory of a 2-point perspective. I feel like 2-point. Yeah, hold on. 1-point perspective. Yeah, this is like I said. So for this one, we have a vanishing point in the middle, and then like all lines lead to said vanishing point. That is a 1-point perspective, and then like this one. This is the horizon line, this is the eye line we are viewing, this is the vanishing point, and I guess orthogonals are the term we use to show how these lines lead back into the vanishing point. Doesn't look like I have. I'll just look for a 2-point perspective. Yeah, so for 2-point perspective, like I said, we have two vanishing points, and both ends will seem like it leads back to the leads back to both ends. Obviously, this is kind of a sorry. There's ads in this drawing software I use. Yeah, please sponsor us actually. Um, so yeah, this is a much more like extreme version of basically what this is. But putting these two, but having the ability to put these boxes in this certain plane and have them all look like they coexist in one area. If you were just to put if you were to put a box like incorrectly drawn into this kind of drawing, it would look like it's like a floating box and it just doesn't make sense. So ultimately, I think yeah, this is a 2-point perspective uh, work of art, and you see we have two vanishing points on both of these ends, which obviously it just basically shows that these uh, these all look and do exist in a similar scene. Now, if we go into 3-point perspective, we're basically going to have a third. That's good enough. Okay. Yeah, we're gonna have a third point. We're gonna have 1, 2, and 3 points, and we're going to start off with a line right here, and we're going to pull each point. I'm going to pull each point from all 3 sides, and then I'm going to say I want a box that looks like this. But the previous examples, we did not have a y-axis, and now we do. So we have, if I want to cut my cube off of there, I'm going to have to pull from this axis, and I'm going to pull from this axis. Now if I connect these last 2 bits, this is going to be my 3-point perspective box. And yes, it looks stupid, but this is exactly how we accomplish with this Jace work of art. Okay, we're gonna zoom in. This is basically these are the 3 points that I showed for the Jace work of art that pulled all 3 points together. These are, if I wanted to approach making this specific box and if I wanted to draw his face, number one, this would be how I approached it. I would I would more or less pull from each. I start using the middle one. Let me choose this color, and I'm not in front of. I would start from this line, and I would pull these lines, and it would just go back here. I would pull from here. I would pull from there, and then I pull from above, and then I'll end it off by pulling bottom here again. And then that's basically how I was able to put a box in the same location as J's to make them look like they exist in the same location. Same, I also approached the same way using this middle box, and ultimately this is step 1 of how I of how I pulled it. And then this is the other axis, and then this is the third axis that I pulled from. And ultimately, this is how I was able to put this box inside of the scene of Jace. Now, now a circle kind of just exists in there. A circle does warp within the 3-point axis. It doesn't exactly warp in a 2-point axis, but I low-key didn't care, so I kind of just skipped over that. Now, if I wanted to approach making a if I wanted to approach making a freaking this one. I wanted to approach making a cylinder, which isn't exactly a box, I initially mapped out a box shape. And if I were to actually make this a normal looking box, I would probably like this would yeah, this one. This would probably be the front page of my box, and then over there would be the back page of my box. But instead of paging those boxes, I ended up drawing circles on both ends, cutting them both off, and this is basically how a cylinder looks using a 3-point perspective kind of grid. Ultimately, this is using these using these these skills. Basically, I was able you could technically deconstruct Jace into very primitive shapes, the initial ones that I talked about in the anatomy lesson, and you can put all of these shapes into a in a location that not only looks like that they exist in a location, but ultimately are posed in a certain way in whichever way you want to convey. I don't think I did a great example. I will probably start scripting my lessons in the future because today was not the greatest. I I I guess I also learned the fact that I start crashing out at 1 hour and 30 instead of the 1 hour mark, which were my first two lectures. I understand that this was probably not the best workshop you guys have attended this week, but if you guys have any questions, this is basically like my this is how I approach my perspective drawings, and this is basically it. This is basically it.
Could we potentially see some of your work to see how this supply, like all the way, gets some like a final product?
Let's see. I think well, I don't actually have a work of art that I think I have this like work in progress work. We're going to we're gonna swipe out of that, and I have this I have this work of art that I've only worked like 45 minutes on, and I this is very obviously very like like very vague in what I'm trying to convey. But number one, I will show you that I did use the golden ratio when trying to build this composition. I wanted everything to look like it flowed back into the person, so that's why I like ultimately chose to have a bunch of these shapes. This shape was intentional. This shape was intentional because ultimately it led me back to creating this golden ratio back to the person. Secondly, I want to say that initially for this drawing, this was the initial stance I had, and then I shifted the camera a little bit to make it look a little bit more dynamic. I don't like having straight lines in my work of art. So I am going to use this part as an example of how I were to approach this. And so if I were to break down the perspective grid, this perspective lines on this grid, I would I would take these organic shapes and I would pull them backwards to a vanishing point that's probably off camera, like I would say up here. And since they all lead up there, and I only find one vanishing point on this work of art, this is probably a 1 point perspective grid. Ultimately, if I want because this is a 1 point perspective grid, this axis is going to always be parallel to the sides of the canvas. So if I were to basically make this guy into a cylinder, first of all, I'm going to start with a cube, or not really a cube, but a rectangular prism, and then I'm going to pull these lines backwards back to the vanishing point up here, and then I'm probably gonna cut this guy off right here. He will exist. This character will exist in this specific um, will exist in this specific box. Since it is 1 point perspective, it's probably not going to have much if it was 1 point perspective, it probably would have an equal amount of spacing, but I did foreshorten it, and that makes me realize that this was not a 1 point perspective. This was actually like a 3 point perspective grid. So ultimately, so I believe that the horizon line would probably be up here, and I would say maybe like here. No. Okay. Let's see. How was it? How did it look? Yeah, I'm pretty sure that although I had a vanishing point up here, there's also a vanishing point down here, and because of it, my character is in more of a cone shape. So I believe that okay, so that leads me to determine that this is probably a two. No, it's probably not a 2 point perspective, but I think it is more or less going to be a 3 point perspective. And then basically, if I were to approach this in a cone shape, this would probably be the way I 1 to 2. Yeah, if I used 1 point perspective at this point, my horizon line would be probably down here, or I think it was up here because yeah, yeah, yes, no, this is good, right? I think the horizon line would actually be like all the way up here because we are looking downwards at a person, and whenever we look down, our horizon line is going to be above our actual viewing line. And so our horizon line is going to be up here. We have two vanishing points on that horizon line, and then we have one more down here. Yeah. That's basically, obviously, if I were, let's see. Let me add layer from canvas. If I were to zoom it much more down and take this, zoom it a lot more downwards here, probably just might as well eyeball it in there. Ultimately, this would be where one of my vanishing points are. This where would be my horizon line, and this is where my character would exist in said location. Yeah. Ultimately, I don't think this is probably not the exact location because high key it would probably be like this would probably be how the yeah. I think this is actually more or less a 4 point perspective. I think I made it this a 4 point perspective. Look, you guys. So don't try this at home. This is like way too complex. Yeah. Ultimate. This this is a 3 point. But
So the point at the top, right, where the chessboard is
yeah.
emerging.
Yeah, that's the fourth point, which I realize don't use this example. This is a little too complex for you guys.
And then the bottom right, where
Yeah, if we are looking at a vacuum specifically at the character, this is going to be a 3 point perspective.
okay, I see.
Yeah,
The grid itself would be a 1 point.
yeah, the grid itself is a 1 point. Yeah, which does make it a 4 point perspective, and that one is hard to incorporate, so don't do it. Yeah, this is, but yeah, the question is, or if no, if we want to find an example, if we wanted to determine how this character exists in a certain plane, that is going to be how it exists. Um,
So why choose to make the character on 3 point and the grid on 1 point?
number one, I thought it looked cool. I'm not gonna lie. This is the part where I'd be like, yeah, this doesn't make sense. I definitely made a mistake somewhere in here. So I'm probably going to have to use a red line and fix that in the future, which is why I encourage like check your work before you make an actual outline. But this is basically like this is how like if it made more sense, there would probably be better lines that kind of explained where they exist in a certain vacuum. But ultimately, 4 points. There's a lot of different perspectives, and don't try this one. Um. So yeah. 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 Do you guys want me to find another example or any other questions? Okay. Thank you guys for staying with me for so long.